Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. And today we will be continuing / concluding our discussion on the Spider-Verse tie-in miniseries as we take a look at Spider-Verse number 2. And just like with the last issue, this issue is just an anthology of stories focusing on different Spideys across the multiverse, so let's just get right into the plot summary. And the first story is actually a rather short one, and it just involves the Spider-Man of the Marvel vs. Capcom games duking it out with Moreland. And pretty much from his perspective, it's just like a regular outing as he hits Moreland with every combo he can think of. But, well, it's ultimately a curb stomp as Moreland just gives him one inheritor fist to the face and he wins the battle. Much to the chagrin of the kid playing whatever game this was, so there you go. But the second story is not as short, but an entertaining one in my opinion. As this case, this one also focuses on another pre-established Spider-Man. In this case, Anansi, the Spider God, who I should probably get into his deal. Anansi, well, he's actually an African folklore character. And basically, the gimmick with him is that in the original folklore stories is that he was a spider who was attributed as a trickster god of tales, and any stories usually told about him were usually just about the various adventures he would get on. And you're probably wondering how such a character would be included in Spider-Verse, because, yeah, he's a spider, but doesn't really seem like a Marvel character. Well, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to tell you about a series of comics that Marvel produced known as the Marvel Fairy Tales line. Basically, the Marvel Fairy Tales books were a series of 3 miniseries that pretty much just retold famous fairy tales, folklore stories, and basically other famous bedtime stories, and essentially replaced all the characters with Marvel characters. So, like, for example, they once retold that one of the issues focused on a retelling of the story of Momotaro, with the X-Men taking the place of the titular characters. They once did a version of Peter Pan that featured the Avengers as Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. And even there was even an alternate story that focused on Pinocchio with Vision as the role of Pinocchio. It's again, I actually do recommend looking into the Marvel Fairy Tales line. I think it's actually pretty interesting. And of course, one of these miniseries focused on Spider-Man, which here's the thing, which is where Anansi comes in, as the second issue of Spider-Man Fairy Tales focused on a version of Anansi who was essentially just that world's Spider-Man. He didn't look like a spider in that story. He basically just looked like an African man living in Africa, and just kind of dealing with his own little problems. And of course, because he was still a mystical trickster god, he still got into his own share of mayhem. But pretty much, he was that world's spider person, and he's also not the first Spider-Man from Spider-Man fairy tales that we've seen in these books. The last one we actually saw was actually the Spider Knight, which I mentioned briefly when I talked about the Spider-Verse storyline. Well, he was technically the Cinderella of that story, as he was taken in by Norman Osborn after his uncle died in battle. He was mistreated, but then he disguised himself to go to a ball, and that was the Spider Knight. Which it's a whole story. I recommend just looking at the book. But the point is, the Spider-Man fairy tales has been represented twice, and this is the second representation with Anansi, the Spider God. And basically, this story actually opens with Anansi kind of running for his life. Basically, what's going on is that this big, I want to say either dirt or tree creature known as Mr. Mighty is pissed at Anansi because, well, he hired Anansi to look after his sheep, but now they're gone and he thinks Anansi took them. As such, Anansi defends himself, even telling him, why would I help? It's like, I didn't steal your sheep, it was someone else, but Mr. Mighty still thinks it's his fault because, well, he was supposed to watch them, so he must have a hand in it. Of course, Anansi defends himself saying, oh, your sheep are annoying, they bleat, they glow, they just make noise and they smell. Why in the name of Shaka, hold on one second, not Shaka, Shango, why in the name of Shango would he steal his sheep? Well, apparently that was the wrong thing to say, because apparently by invoking that particular god, he summons that particular god, as apparently Shango takes on the form of a raging tornado who wants to know who the hell invoked his name. Shango immediately turns his attention to Mr. Mighty and wants to know what the hell's going on, but it's here that Anansi decides that he wants to make a getaway, as he sees this urn on standby, and he thinks that this would be his ticket to getting out of here. And I have to remind you that this is a universe based off of an African fairy tale, because, well, Anansi just poops himself into the urn and lets it get blown away in the wind so he can make his escape. However, this is where the story remembers it's a Spider-Verse tie-in because once the urn lands away from all the carnage, it turns out that someone finds it. Specifically, Billy Braddock, aka Spider UK, who, upon Billy finding the urn, Anansi comes out and Billy introduces himself because, well, he's here to recruit Anansi because he's recruiting spider people for the army, and, well, he wants Anansi to join him. Of course, once he gives Anansi the whole spiel of, look, we're all being hunted, we need your help, Anansi pretty much tells him he's not interested because, well, he's the god of stories, and there's a story going on right now, and he wants to see how it ends, and he thinks it would be unsatisfactory to just leave in the middle of a tale without seeing how it goes. Of course, Billy thinks this is kind of dumb. Because even if he doesn't want to join the army, the trouble will eventually be on his doorstep soon, and we have seen the inheritors can take on gods, so he's still in danger. But Anansi decides to kind of compromise with him. He pretty much tells him, look, I don't want to leave in the middle of the story, but maybe you can help me get to the end of it quicker. And so he ends up donning Billy in essentially a sheep's garb, and pretty much tells him, I want you to just go with the flow. But to be warned, you can't say anything. This is my tale. You're not from here, and if you do anything to disturb it, it could disrupt our natural order and be the end of all things. Which, spoilers, he's full of it, but he needs Billy to cooperate with him. So after Billy says he understands this, Anansi pretty much tells him, good, now get ready. And Billy says, for what? Before he gets tackled by a tiger who takes him away. As such, Anansi calls for Mr. Mighty and tells him that the tiger is the one who stole the sheep, and so Mr. Mighty goes charging after the tiger, fully intending to get what is his back, and I'm guessing he's successful, as the comic then cuts to later that night, as we see that Mr. Mighty is sleeping in front of all his pen of sheep, who he has thankfully gotten back, and overlooking all the pen of sheep is Anansi and the tiger. Yeah, spoilers, they're actually in cahoots. Anansi pretty much set this whole thing up because, well, he got annoyed at Mr. Mighty, because apparently Mr. Mighty has been constantly asking Anansi to take care of his sheep, and while Anansi got sick of having him keep asking him, so he decided to essentially teach him a lesson to do his own work for him. So he intentionally let himself be put in charge of the sheep, and then worked with in cahoots with the tiger to get them all kidnapped. He fully intended to return them, hence why he had the tiger come back and even point Mr. Mighty in the tiger's direction. But yeah, this was Anansi's way of messing with Mr. Mighty and to just get him off his back. As such, the tiger tells Anansi that maybe they should go and try and help Billy because he's been a good sport about this, so maybe they should get him out of this. And so Anansi just kind of sighs and says, yeah, you're right, I probably should go help him. And so he sneaks into Mr. Mighty's sheep stable, and he does get Billy out of there. And of course, Billy is still trying to keep up the act. Although at one point when Anansi is running around, he accidentally steps on the foot of a sheep who tells him, hey, you stepped on my foot. And when he apologizes, Billy reacts accordingly. Holy shit, you have talking sheep! He starts realizing, oh my god, you're full of it. Here you are talking about the natural order of things, and you got talking sheep here. It's just funny. I like that. It's just Billy giving Anansi crap, and the instant they step out of the stable and Billy sees the tiger. At first, he thinks the tiger is the one. Of course, he first thinks the tiger's to blame, but Anansi then tells him, no, that was me, and we worked together, and all that stuff. But either way, after Anansi finishes explaining to that, he decides that he's going to concede to Billy's demands, as Billy played along and did his role, so Anansi figures that, maybe I'll play along and do mine with you. As such, he gets ready to leave with Billy to go join the spider army. Before he goes, he runs back to the tiger and pretty much negotiates payment, so to speak, as he gives him the urn, and we hear whispers of the tiger talking about maybe he'll take one or two, and sure enough, after he gives him the urn, which we've already established is a mystical urn, which can fit people inside it, as we saw with Anansi runs off, and Billy asks, what were you guys talking about? And it's like, I was just thanking him for his service and told him not to get greedy, and sure enough, as Billy and Anansi leave, you see the tiger using the urn to grab some sheep for the road. So that's fun. But anyway, that's second story done. The third story, however, actually tells a story of another Spidey who was introduced in Spider-Verse, and this is one we have met again. In this case, this story focuses on Hobby Brown, aka the Spider-Punk. And, well, I can finally talk about his origin story, and put simply, like many other Spider-Men across the multiverse, Hobby got his powers from being bitten by a radioactive spider, which of course gave him all the traditional spider abilities. Proportionate strength, speed, agility, wall crawling, spider sense, all that good stuff. However, the difference between Hobby and a lot of other Spider-Men is that he didn't get from like a science demonstration or a science experiment or whatever. No, his spider was radioactive because it was irradiated by toxic waste, which was dumped into rivers. Yeah, Hobby's universe is kind of a crap hole. Basically, his universe is the people versus authority, and Hobby is the one kind of stoking the fire, so to speak, because, well, he's one. As I said when I talked about the Spider-Verse storyline, he is very much an anti-authoritarian anarchist spider person, and, well, there's good reason for that is because as the story opens, we do end up looking out to seeing America, and while we're seeing news broadcasts about how everything is great, everyone's doing like America is all great, we're all under strict leadership, and the day's coming up, and all the rats are crawling into their holes. We're seeing scenes of police beating up people, and beating up rioters, fire trucks being hosing on protesters, and finally a whole army of police officers going up against Hobby as he stands in the middle of the street with his own delegation, so to speak. I call them a delegation, but it's really just a group of more rioters. In this case, they're Hobby's spider army. And basically, well, the power that Hobby is fighting in this case, it's Norman Osborn. Yeah, in this universe, Norman managed to get into the president's seat, and based on the stuff we've seen before this little moment, it seems he's traded freedom for security in America. And while while America is all safe, it's basically built on the backs of all these people. And, well, Hobby and the Spider Army are here to take him down. And another little fun fact, one member of the Spider Army is this world's version of Captain America, who we learn is actually called Captain Anarchy. It's a thing. He's actually a pretty good character. We get more expanded on him in later stories, but he's a nice character. Pretty much despite his name being Anarchy, he's still the Cap we all know. I mean, he's not Steve Rogers, but personality-wise, you get what I mean. He's this world's Captain America. Moving on. Either way, Hobby and his spider army stand poised in the middle of the street as Hobby stands on top of these amps, holding a guitar in his hands. And, well, basically down the street from them, like I said, is an army of police officers, and the one at their forefront is President Norman Osborn, who is just kind of smiling and acting, pretty much putting on his best PR face as he just is all happy. But we see the police aren't exactly human. Yeah, it's here we also see this world's version of another Spidey villain. As it turns out, because Norman is the president of the United States, this world's version of Oscorp has a lot more leeway in what goes on in our public services. Case in point, he developed the Venom symbiote. Only in this case, the Venom symbiote doesn't just need to bond with one person, it can bond with multiple people, as we see in the scene, as all the police officers and their dogs are bonded with it, including Norman. Which, yeah, I admit it is kind of creepy seeing Norman still smiling as he gets as the black goo spreads over him and he gets the Venom face, which, yeah, it's weird that Norman Osborn is Venom in this universe. Kind of reminds me of Ultimate Spider-Man and how they made Harry and Venom. But but I'm not talking about the cartoon. We're here to talk about the comic. Either way, Norman pretty much says that they made America great again. Everything is all hunky-dory, and the last little bit of resistance is Hobby and his Spider Army, and once they wipe them out, everything will be all good. And so Norman pretty much gives the okay, and his venomized police officers go running at Hobby and his Spider Army, and while Captain Anarchy tells everyone to hold the ground and get ready, we see that Hobby is actually getting ready himself, as what the police don't realize is that the amps he's standing on, they're on, as they're humming, and Hobby has his guitar on standby, and as Captain Anarchy is giving the order saying 1, 2, Hobby takes over as he yells out 1, 2, 3, 4, raises his guitar back in the air and strums his guitar. And it turns out those amps are turned up to 11 as the loud noise hits the police for something fierce. And I guess despite the fact that the Venom symbiote was developed by Oscorp in this universe, they still didn't get rid of a few key weaknesses, because the instant that the venomized police officers are hit with such loud noise, their symbiotes start coming off of them and they all start convulsing in pain. And as such, this allows the spider army to go running in and start kicking ass, taking down police officers, knocking them aside. Even Captain Anarchy manages to throw his shield right into one guy's face. But in the midst of it all, Norman Osborn is still struggling to stay bonded with his symbiote, but he's still maintaining that stupid slasher smile as he's on the ground, and he's pretty much determined to not give up as he reaches into his suit and pulls out a gun, intent on shooting Hobby square in the face. But pretty much Hobby is not letting him even get a chance. As Hobby stands over him, he raises his guitar into the air and slams it down right on President Osborn's head, which, yeah, you don't see his face popping out of his skull, but you do see a little snippet, and it's gross. But either way, the Spider Army is victorious. The police are taken down. President Norman Osborn is dead, and so Hobby removes his mask and raises his fist in solidarity as the Spider Army proclaims its victory. So, overall pretty cool. But that's all. But that's not where the story ends, because, well, when we saw Hobby in the Spider-Verse storyline, he was with the superior Spider Army after all, and sure enough, after Hobby secures his victory, we cut to a little epilogue as we see the superior Spider-Man looking over Hobby Brown's data and pretty much just getting getting his personality profile, learning how he's egotistical, irrational, how he doesn't respect authority, and how all this together, Otto thinks he's perfect for their army, and so that's where the story ends. So. Well, so whatever. Anyway, let's get to the fourth story of Spider-Verse. In this case, this one talks about, once again, another Spider-Man who's introduced in Spider-Verse, and, well, we don't end up seeing again after Spider-Verse. In this case, this is the tale of Arachnido Jr., a Mexican Spider-Man, and his story is a little... It still contains the base elements of Spider-Man, but there are some things changed around. Case in point, in this reality, rather than Arachnido Jr. having gotten his powers from a radioactive spider bite or something, he actually inherited those powers from his father, the original Arachnido. However, his dad was not actually a superhero. Rather, his dad was a luchador, and he was a very I forget the word. Hold on one second. Sorry. He was a very talented luchador, very strong, great in the ring, and everyone cheered his name. However, he was also partnered up with this world's version of the Scorpion, and, well, as we are well aware, scorpions can kind of sting. And unfortunately that happened to the original Arachnido, as during one luchador fight, well, he wound up getting pinned, and he needed his partner's help, but the Scorpion just crossed his arms and stood his ground. And as such, while the other fighter did end up winning the bout, unfortunately, to win it, he wound up critically injuring Arachnido, causing him to have to get wheeled away by the hospital. To make this kind of worse, that Junior was sitting in the audience watching this, and he didn't take it well. Made even worse by the fact when after the fight, when he goes to the locker rooms because he wants to see his dad, he sees the Scorpion accepting a bribe. Yep, he was paid to throw the match and let Arachnido get hurt. And while this does shake him, the referee manages to shake Junior out of his stupor and tells him, look, you gotta go see your dad, he needs you. And so he wound up going to the hospital to visit his dad, but sadly the news was not good. The doctor pretty much told him that he was pretty much given an I'm sorry by the doctor, and I don't know if this means his dad is now in a coma and they don't know when he's going to wake up, or if he died from his injuries. Either way, essentially, Junior is now an orphan. As such, kind of faced with the injustices he saw in the ring and what happened to his dad, he decides to use the powers he inherited from his father and use it for good. And so when he grew up, he took on the mantle of Arachnido himself and became Mexico City's version of Spider-Man. And sure enough, the story actually focuses on him doing his thing, as based on what I can tell, the president of Mexico's daughter has been kidnapped. I think by the Mexican cartel, but don't quote me on that. Either way, she's been kidnapped, and Arachnido wants to find her. As a couple of the cartel's men are at a taco shack getting dinner before Arachnido comes in and webs them up, wanting to know if he can tell them if they can tell him where their boss is. Unfortunately, they didn't come alone, as immediately the Mexican cartel other members of the Mexican cartel start opening fire on Arachnido, but but he's this world's Spider-Man. He easily handles them. He managed to knock them all aside, managed to knock their car aside using a manhole cover, and ultimately, after everyone's taken down, he grabs another one of the cartel and he pretty much just holds him up on top. He pretty much just climbs the wall, holds up, and says, "If you want to tell me where your boss is, you better tell me now before you lose the use of your legs." And so he tells him right away where his boss is, and so Arachnito swings off to his hideout, where after he takes out a few guards, he manages to sneak into the house and finds the president's daughter tied up. Which he takes out the guard that was about to bring her soup. Which that was why the guys went out. They were getting dinner for everybody. But he managed to untie the president's daughter, who immediately thanks him. But things are not going well upstairs, as the boss of the cartel is wondering where the guys are that were supposed to bring them tacos. And so after he tells the guy to put some food together, which I assume is what he brings down to the daughter, as when Arachnito found her, he was bringing her soup. He immediately tries calling them, only to learn that the police got them. As such, the boss of the cartel realizes, okay, we're screwed, we gotta run. And so, he runs down to the basement with the intent of grabbing the girl and booking it. But again, this is Arachnito just saved her. And so he tells her, hey, you want to play a game? And so, once he gets down there, he finds the president's daughter standing over the unconscious body of one of his guards. And as he's wondering what the hell's going on, Arachnito comes in and just webs him up, with him asking the girl if she was a Girl Scout before she helps tie the guy up, and he's wrapped up in a big web burrito. And so the story ends with it. And so Arachnito pretty much, with the story ending with Arachnito congratulating her and pretty much got talking smack to the cartel boss. So there you go. And finally, the last story is actually one that does kind of tie in directly to stuff that happens in Spider-Verse, as the final story, called It's the Little Things, actually takes place during the climax of Spider-Verse, when the Spider Army attacks Loom World. And basically the group shot we see in the beginning of the story showcases that Miles and Drake Bell's Spidey apparently got a lot more Spider-Man than we thought, because there is a lot. Or maybe there was more Spider-Man in the army than we saw. Either way, there is a crap ton of Spider-Man there, and we see them pretty much duking it out with the Inheritors, and the Inheritors are pretty much just doing everything in their power to keep them off them. However, in the midst of the battle, the main universe Spider-Man ends up running out of web fluid, and coincidence of all coincidences, another Spidey wearing the black suit ends up running out as well. Miles tells them they can take cover, and the army will cover them, and so the two Spideys end up jumping behind a bit of rubble as they end up swapping out web cartridges. And this actually allows a pretty fun moment, as both Spider-Men just talk. Yeah, that's really all they do. That's pretty much just what happens in the story. They just talk. They both start comparing notes about each other, and it kind of starts with Spider-Man asking, okay, so you got web cartridges, so I'm assuming that's just your black costume and not the symbiote? The other Spider-Man's like, It's like, it's just a black costume, but how'd you know I had a symbiote? And it's like, oh, I had one too. I got it from the Secret Wars? Yeah, I got it from small multiverse, huh? And it's from there, they just begin talking, like I said. It's just them comparing and contrasting between all the various Spideys in the multiverse, how most of the Spideys here are Peter Parker, but there are other ones that are different, like the Spider-Man from Japan, or how, oddly enough, the Spider-Man from the Sam Raimi trilogy of films and the the Amazing Spider-Man duology are also there, and they think, oh, that's cool, as well as apparently the Spider-Man from the Electric Company TV show and the Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark musical, which I kind of find awesome. I gotta admit that's just awesome. However, as the Spideys end up finally filling up with web fluid and are about to get ready to jump back into battle, they begin wondering, hey, how are we different? And so they start comparing notes further, and they find that their lives are very similar. When they start naming off things like their loved ones, their places they've been to, how they got their powers, and so on and so forth, they're pretty similar. Even down to like Norman Osborn being the Green Goblin, they're almost the same. As such, not really having enough time to start continually compare notes, Peter decides, maybe the things that make us different are just the little things. Maybe it's not important. And so they end up swinging away and joining the army once again as they once again go on the assault on Loom World. And so as the Amazing Spider-Man swings away, he tells his black suited counterpart, "After you, Pete." It's like after you, Peter, and the black suited Spider-Man says a very telling line. "After you, Mr. Parker." Yep. It turns out the difference between the black-suited Spider-Man and his main universe counterpart, he's still married. Which I'll get into when I get to my thoughts on the story, which, yeah, that's the final story in the comic, so I can probably actually give my thoughts on all the stories. The first one, silly, stupid fun. It's literally just fighting game Spider-Man duking it out with Morlun and getting curb stomped. Pretty much, it's just, I admit, it's just stupid. It's stupid but amusing, especially when he just one-shots him with a punch to the face, or Morlun one-shots Spider-Man with a punch to the face, and the kid playing the game is just going, what the fuck? Like, it's stupid, but I love it. The Anansi story, though, it has a lot of charm to it. Like with 1602 Spider-Man, this was actually my introduction to the Anansi character, and like with 1602, it did make me curious about the Spider-Man fairy tales books, which in turn made me seek them out and further seek out the other Marvel fairy tale miniseries. But essentially, it's just basically the Anansi story. It's just a charming little story, just featuring Anansi just being a trickster. I do kind of like how things go, especially as he's just doing his own thing throughout the story. You can tell just from the get-go that Anansi is just kind of bullshitting. Like when Mr. Mighty is calling him out saying, "But you took my sheep, where are they?" And Anansi's saying, "Oh, it wasn't me." He pretty much just winks to the audience. It's like, "Oh, actually it was." Like, it's clear he's just being a douche to him, but he's doing everything. But pretty much Anansi is clever and smart and is just kind of getting out of, and just trying to find a way out of the situation, which, yeah, the charm of stories like that is just kind of seeing the trickster have to try and figure out a way to get out of the situations he's put himself in. And we see that with Anansi throughout the story, as we see him being clever and finding ways around facing his punishment. As when he gets cornered by Mr. Mighty, he once again invokes the name of, hold on one second. Sorry, I had to look up the name again. He invokes the name of Shango, which summons the god and allows him a distraction to escape. And then when Billy Braddock comes up and says, "Hey, you need to come with me," he pretty much just decides to turn this to his advantage, he doesn't want to face the responsibility. As when Billy tells him, "Hey, you gotta join our army, you gotta help us fight these monsters," he's like, not interested, in the middle of my own thing, I want to see how this goes. And yeah, again, it just kind of helps showcase more of his character, as he's aware that the threat is big, but he's aware that Billy is recruiting him for some big threat. But, well, one thing, he's a trickster god. And one of the things that was established about him is that, well, he gets bored easy. From time to time, he asked his father or his uncle Nebesti, which, yeah, is supposed to be the proxy to Uncle Ben in this universe, about just to give him a quest that he can go on for some grand purpose. And even the initial story in Spider-Man Fairy Tales was him trying to get a flower that he could use to control people and make them his friends, which through the journey of getting the flower, he actually did make friends in the elementals, so it was a cute story. But again, for this story, it's just him. He just wants to see Mr. Mighty squirm, so to speak. Yeah, he's trying to avoid the consequences, but the joy for him is just kind of getting Mr. Mighty to wisen up, which, yeah, even Billy admits later on in the story that if he really got sick of Mr. Mighty constantly getting on his case to help him, why didn't he just tell him to screw off? Which Anansi responds with, "Should I have told that to you?" Which, Billy admits it's not the same situation, but he sees his point. Essentially, even if he had said that, it wouldn't have worked. So he sees his point because, yeah, even if he had told Mr. Mighty, "I don't want to do your job, leave me alone," it wouldn't have worked. As he said, Mr. Mighty kept pestering him. So the only way he could really get the message to stick in was essentially by setting up a situation to make Mr. Mighty never want him back again. Hence why he allied with the tiger and said, "Hey, steal these sheep, I'll pin the blame on you later, but if you do what I say, you can take a few with you to actually eat." So again, it's silly trickster. It's just him being a trickster and just kind of playing everybody. But he's so charming as he plays everybody. It's just kind of fun in that regard. Even by the end, how he even starts pulling Billy into the story and begins messing with him just so he'll comply with everything. It's fun. Even by the end, when he goes to save him, it's like, as he thought, well, you did what I asked, so I'll do what you want. Because even when Billy learns that the whole sacred order is BS because everything here is basically a big folklore, It's just made up of it runs on folklore logic. Even Anansi just pretty much even Anansi just kind of brushes it off and just kind of rolls with everything. But again, he's still charming enough to make him likable, and as we saw with him going to save Billy, he still has the one thing that most Spider-Men should have: his heart. As he still is a good-natured guy, he wants to do the right thing, and he is still concerned with people and their lives. As when he was being chased by Mr. Mighty, he grabbed a porcupine and ran and carried him with him during the chase because he didn't want it getting hurt. And then likewise after he went to save Billy, he pretty much didn't tell him, okay, go on your way, I got other things to do. He pretty much said, you played your part, and so I should just play mine. So I like that. It's again showcasing that despite his trickster personality, he's still a good guy at heart and does still keep his word. So it's just a fun story, and I do like how it's implemented, showing Anansi being more of a trickster and actually having some kind of moral, which fairy tales and folklore tales typically have. In this case, sometimes you just gotta do your own. In this case, you shouldn't be hawking your responsibilities onto someone else. You should take responsibility. You should take responsibility on your own. Which, yeah, Anansi wanted to teach him Mr. Mighty because he wanted to get him off his back. But at the end of the day, But at the end of the day, it isn't a bad lesson. As pretty much as he knew that the only way that he could actually get it through his big giant skull is if he got some hands-on experience, which is why Anansi hired the tiger and pretty much just made it sound like it was his, and pretty much made Mr. Mighty and pretty much got Mr. Mighty just to realize, okay, I gotta watch these things for myself. So again, overall, good story, fun times, and then we get to Spider-Punk. This story is short, but it's fucking awesome. Like, it's a short story. It doesn't have a lot of substance to it. The whole meat of the story is the Spider Army clashing with Norman Osborn and his venomized police force. But it kicks so much ass, especially because of how they draw it, which I'll try and show an example of the art style for the story. Just freaking look at this. This is awesome. Like the way the dark colors the stylized designs for everything. It really does feel like the cover of a punk rock album, and it kicks so much ass. And the way that when you see Hobby in his Spider-Man outfit just standing already his Spider Army is getting ready to face the venomized police force that are at him, which even that looks awesome. As you can see the Venom symbiote twisting and writhing around the police officers like a demon. It's just creepy, especially Norman at the front, who's bonded with a symbiote, and it just keeps up with his trademark publicity smile. Like, oh yeah, it's like for him. This is just business, necessary business. They're in the business of making America great, so they need to tidy away the rats and spiders. So it's awesome. It's just creepy, and I like that. But again, it kicks so. But again, the finale when Hobby amps up the music and pretty much depowers the police force and it's just, again, it's short and sweet, but it's just awesome. Seeing the armies clash, them starting to kick ass, even Hobby just bringing his guitar down on Norman. It's fucking awesome, and the whole story really does have this whole nonchalance about how over the top this is. That's like, they know, like the writers are aware of how insane this setup was, and they just went with it. It was awesome. It was just awesome in that regard. And by the end, when Hobby declares his victory and the superior Spider-Man gets ready to recruit him, it does feel really fun. It was a short story, but I think it does well in setting up Hobby Brown as Spider-Punk, showcasing in a very quick time that his Spider-Man, how his Spider-Man is very much anti-authoritarian and is ready to kick ass should the situation demand it. It's just badass. It's just a really badass story. Short, kind of stupid, but just so badass, and I love it. So there you go. As for the fourth story with Arachnito Jr., this one actually has a little gimmick that admittedly kind of annoys me as an English-speaking comic reader. It's written in Spanish, which I find to be a bit of a double-edged sword. I say it annoys me because, here's the thing, I don't understand Spanish. The most I was exposed to Spanish were the classes I took in high school, and I only remember so much Spanish from those classes, so that doesn't really help me to read the book. And as a result, I had to use a translator when I reread it for this vlog, and even the translator wasn't 100% accurate. While I was able to get the story down well with the whole cartel kidnapping the president's daughter and Arachnito going to save her, well, it still was it still was just kind of strange because I don't know. It just feels kind of weird. And again, I call this a double-edged sword because on the one hand, is annoying to read if you are just a regular English speaker and you see the story, because unfortunately, if you want to know the plot of the story, you kind of do need to read the dialogue. Just based on the artwork, which I'll admit the artwork is pretty cool, cartoony but full of action, and it's cartoony but full of good action, and does kind of flow well with each other. I especially love the design for Arachnito's costume, but this blue costume with red mixed in with red just kind of spread out across it. It kicks ass and pops and looks cool as a Spider-Man suit, so I dig it. But basically, just from the artwork, you can tell that he's going to save someone, but you don't have any of the context clues, especially since, well, Arachnito is just as much of a snippy wise-ass as most other Spider-Man, and even does manage to slip in a few taunts to the villains when he fights him. When he interrogates the goons that are going to get everyone dinner, and they're ordering tacos, he wells up and says, it's like, hey, can you tell me where your boss is? We're getting tacos together later. So, and even later on, when he pokes fun at the boss and calls him a burrito, that's something Spider-Man would do. Hell, when he confronts the guards outside his base, they're talking about how the boss was talking to the president's daughter. It's like, hey, no kidding. Hey, by the way, where is he? At which point the guards start attacking him. He knocks him out. It's like, don't worry, I'll go find her myself. It's again, that is Spider-Man. That's funny. That's typical. That's his typical attitude. It's just the problem is, if you're like me and you can only understand so much Spanish, or hell, don't even understand Spanish at all, that's going to be a detriment, because unless you know the language, you're going to struggle. But with that being said, why I still call this a double-edged sword is because I think it does well in the diversity angle. One of the gimmicks with Spider-Man that I love and Spider-Verse embraces in both the movies and the comics is that anybody can wear the mask. And part of what makes all of the Spider-Verse story unique is that while the whole gimmick is that all of these different Spideys are from across the multiverse and their stories are very similar, not all of them are the same. Some of them, like most of them, are alternate versions of Peter Parker, but there's always those few who aren't. We have like we either have our Miles Moraleses or our Lady Spiders or Hobby Browns. Basically, these people who you wouldn't expect to be in the spider suit, but do, and they offer a unique take on the character because at the end of the day, Spider-Man's an everyman. He can be anybody, and the whole idea of setting up Spider-Man into these different locations and these different locations and scenarios, I think can work to the advantage of your story because it adds to the whole everyman aspect of Spider-Man. And so likewise, having a Mexican Spider-Man who is basically so entrenched in the whole thing that that even the story itself is in Spanish, I think that can work. And I think I honestly, while I can't speak for any Mexican viewers, sorry, I heard a noise. But while I can't speak for any Mexican readers of the story as I'm a white guy who lives in America, I can safely say that I think that this story is a good one in that angle. As again, it showcases him entrenched in the environment, just doing a Spider-Man thing, kicking ass, and ultimately save the day. There's nothing big about the story. It's just him saving a little girl, and sometimes you just need that. It's just a cute little setup overall, and the way it all resolves itself is typical Spider-Man antics. Kicks bad guy ass, makes a few quips, and at the end of the day, all the good guys win and the innocent lives are saved. So I dig it. I do like it. I do think the story itself is fine. It's just that I think its greatest strength also can be a bit of a detriment, because unless you can speak Spanish, I don't think you can understand the story. There is apparently an English version of the story out there, but for the life of me, I can't find it. Apparently, because apparently when Spider-Verse #2 was being sold fresh out the market, it came with a digital code that you could redeem on the Marvel app and download an English version of the story. But I never got that. But I did not buy this book on off the rack. I bought the first time I read it was in the trade format. So yeah, I don't understand. So yeah, I don't have that code, and to my knowledge, the English version is apparently very hard to find online. So, With that said, though, I'm not. With that said, though, like I said, the story just feels kind of like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I think as a Mexican Spider-Man, I think he works, and while having to read the story in Spanish can be annoying if you don't speak the language, I do think it does a good job at further entrenching this Spider-Man in the setting, showcasing him as a native Mexican and even having his backstory tie into it with his father being a luchador who was ultimately hurt and potentially killed because his partner took a dive on the orders of some shady individuals. So I like that. So I think that works. And overall, like I said, the story itself is just fine. It's nothing too big, nothing too fantastic, but it's just simple Spider-Man. It's a simple Spider-Man story, which I think gets the job across, and I think and overall is just nice. So yeah, like I said, while I have my own detriments with the story, not bad. It's not bad. It's just that you need to be. It's just that if you want to read it, you better have at least a good grasp of Spanish. So there you go. But the final story, it's the little things. That one's the one with the most implications, believe it or not. As while these other stories do focus on other Spider-Men and all in their tales, and in some cases how they join in Spider-Verse, the final story is actually a setup for a miniseries, believe it or not. Going back to the black-suited Spider-Man that Peter talked about, well, actually, before we get to that, let's talk about the joy in it. One of the things that I like with It's the Little Things is just these two different Spider-Men in the same room together and just talking, which, again, it's just simple and sweet, and I like it. What I like about having multiple what I always love about having big events like this, especially when it involves multiversal proportions and having characters from different universes interacting, is just kind of seeing them talking. And that's what we see with the two Spider-Men in the story. Well, I don't know where this story could take place in the realm of Spider-Verse, as when I read the storyline, it looked like that Peter and co. just booked it right into the Inheritors Great Hall the instant Miles and his army showed up, so whatever. But with that being said, it is pretty cool to see the two Spideys just see Spider-Man and his black-suited counterpart just talking and exchanging notes, just kind of joking off each other, talking about the various all the Spideys they've seen after joining the army. It's just a short, sweet little conversation that just shows these two Spider-Men just interacting and just working off of each other. I love how they talk about some of the stranger Spider-Man when they talk about the ones from Electric Company, Turn Off the Dark, and even the ones from the movies, which, yeah, I think this comic came out before the MCU actually brought Spider-Man into the fold properly, so yeah, he's not part of the event at all. But overall, it is pretty nice. But of course, there's that final twist at the end. Because after all, the black-suited Spider-Man seemed very similar to his main universe counterpart. Except for one little thing. In his universe, he's still married. Which, believe it or not, that is the most important thing. Because this Spider-Man, well, like I said, he gets his own miniseries. The Amazing Spider-Man, Renew Your Vows, and the big gimmick with that universe is that it's a reality where Peter never made the stupid deal with Mephisto, and thus he and Mary Jane are still married. They have a daughter named Annie Mae Parker, and basically it's just them trying to survive as parents with their daughter, as the storyline is supposed to be a tie-in to another event called Secret Wars, which we'll talk about, believe me. But the story also kind of spawned off into its own ongoing series, which I own all the volumes of it, and it pretty much is just involving the Parker family as they're a family of crime fighters, basically all acting as all of them being Spider-themed superheroes in some way, with Mary Jane getting a suit that can somehow copy her husband's powers, and of course their daughter inheriting her dad's abilities. I'll get more into detail about it later, but essentially what makes this interesting is that just from this one little interaction, it does drop the it drops the seed because again, up until that last line where he calls Peter Mr. Parker, he seems very similar to the main universe Spider-Man. But then when you learn he's still married, immediately a door is opened and you start wondering, what's his life like as a married man? How is everything going now? How is everything going in the world where he and MJ are still happily married? It's again just a small little detail, but a small detail that has so many implications behind it, and as a result of it, it wound up getting its own story and its own and its own ongoing series. Which, guess what? The ongoing series does get revisited in future storylines. We see characters from that universe coming back into the fold in various events. In Venomverse, we see Mary Jane come back because she bonded with her world's Venom symbiote for a time, and then during Spider-Geddon, the entirety of the Parker family from that universe joined up in one form or another. And every Spider-Verse event afterwards does call back to them. I'm not going to get into too many details as that goes into spoiler territory, but it is again just a nice small little thread, and what makes it better is that it's just like the title of the story says. It's a little thing, something that you would have very easily missed. And I like how they drop it in. Just having these two Spider-Men doing a seemingly normal conversation about their worlds, their lives, and the other Spider-Men they've met, and so until finally they both have to run into battle, and this Spider-Man drops the hint, just one little thing in the form of a little bit of conversation, in the form of the conversation, revealing that yes, he and the Amazing Spider-Man are different in one key area. And while it may not look like a big deal now, it does lead to some bigger things later on. So, yeah, overall, fine story. Just a cute, nice little tongue-in-cheek way of introducing the Renew Your Vows Spider-Man. So, I dig it. That's nice. Overall, yeah, the Spider-Verse miniseries is... it's fun. Like with Edge of Spider-Verse, as I mentioned in the last video, what makes it good is having all these different stories focusing on all these different versions of Spider-Man. And like with Edge of Spider-Verse, we get to see them all filtered and seeing all these Spideys just doing their own thing in their own worlds. And much like with Edge of Spider-Verse issue 1, it allows us to also check back in with other Spideys that we've seen before, like with Mangaverse Spider-Man or Anansi. So it really does feel cool to just check back in and see what they're doing as they're being brought into the event, and also setting up some new Spider-Man. After all, the last issue introduced us to Lady Spider and Penelope Parker, and this issue introduced us to Hobby Brown and Arachnito Jr. Now, admittedly, two of the names of all those four Spider-Man, only two end up doing major stuff in the storyline. But at the very least, it's still cool to see all these unique takes, and admittedly, those stories are still pretty good too. Like I said, the Arachnito story is just a simple, fun storyline of the Mexican Spider-Man just doing his own thing, and the Penelope Parker story, as I said, is adorkable. But overall, while it may not be big, I do think the Spider-Verse tie-in miniseries is a lot of fun, and I think a great addition to the tie-ins for Spider-Verse. Again, it still feels weird that that the tie-in is actually named for the storyline rather than the actual storyline being in the book, which actually sounds confusing when I say it out loud. But overall, still is a lot of fun, and I enjoy it. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Apologies if I continually stammered and sputtered throughout this whole thing. It was just me. It was me once again having diarrhea of the mouth. But I do hope you still enjoyed this. And while this miniseries may be over, we still got some more times to look at. And well, let's just say that we're not done seeing the Spideys of the multiverse interacting with each other. So next time we meet, we're going to be starting up the Spider-Verse team-up miniseries as we actually look back to the lead-in material and see the various Spideys of both armies getting ready to recruit. So until then, I hope you have a good day. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you on Saturday. Take care.